glassing in the whitetail world is almost a lost art these days. Trail cameras have almost shut that down. I mean, it's just, and partially, a lot of whitetail hunters have been pushed onto smaller and smaller properties where it may not be possible, especially for the public land hunter. But what I see when I run across Western hunters who know what they're doing, it's get on the glass and be patient.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the lesson here, right? And you're talking, I think a lot of people don't understand. You'll pick a glassing vantage point, whether you can see, a huge sage flat, alfalfa fields in the distance, river bottom, whatever, or a bunch of, mountain basins, however you want to do it. But you're talking about change your perspective just a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's a lesson. Like when you're sitting out there glassing, and I'm always amazed by this, you'll be looking over nothing, and all of a sudden there'll be just a deer standing there.
Exactly.
And, especially with the sun, the right sun. And so you think about that. That can happen in a split second in one spot. But now you're talking about just shift your perspective a little bit. It's the same kind of concept as being a really mobile whitetail hunter. Is a lot of times, when you're in the deciduous forest, or you're up north in northern Michigan or wherever, it might be the difference between your stand being on one ridge or 100 yards down it.
Yeah.
Same rules apply in a totally different scenario for mule deer, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing is like, it's hard to not want to just start traipsing through and hiking, and you will see deer, but generally they're going to be running away from you. You're going to be pushing them out, and especially with like mature mule deer bucks, if you bump them, they're out of the country.
Yep.
They might not come back. It's not one of those things where you can leave and they'll come back the next day. Like if you actually bump them, they're probably gone, and they're going to go somewhere. They're going to go find somewhere where they're not going to be abused and they're not going to see any people. And I think, that's the key thing for mule deer is like, outside of the rut, when it's just early season, mule deer bucks want to be away. They want to get away from people, and so that can be rough, rugged country, but also that can be places that people look past. So in Arizona this last December, we were seeing a lot of deer right off main roads that people were just driving by. They never thought to get down, and when you peek over, it's pretty rugged, and they can bed up and they can see everything. Their back's good, they have the wind in their face. But people are just driving by. They never thought of looking, and we would park out, walk anywhere from 200 yards to a mile, sit on a point, and all of a sudden there'd just be deer everywhere.
Yep.
And then we'd hear, like opening morning, we heard 14 cars drive by, and I could see them. And there's just a bunch of deer right in the bottom because no one even bothered to look at that. And so kind of playing, that could be a boundary you're doing between public, private. It could be roads, or it could be just trying to get as far into the nastiest, deepest country as possible. I think trying to find seclusion where people aren't going to be interrupting their daily routines.
Yeah, and we talk about that a lot. We come across this a lot now where the mindset is get 7 miles in, get away from everybody, and you find all these undisturbed animals. And, we were talking before we got on the air here, there aren't any secrets left.
Yeah.
I mean, there just aren't. And what you mentioned there is it's such a good lesson. So if you can't see something from the road, it might be worth getting in and taking a look.
Yeah.
And you and I were talking about our mutual love for the Badlands in North Dakota. And that's one thing we found, my buddies and I found, that's where we cut our teeth mule deer hunting. And we'd be driving along, and everybody's driving the same roads, the same oil well roads or whatever, and some of them offer really good views where you can get out and glass and see a long ways. Some of them will skirt a side hill or something where you can't see anything, and so you don't know what's 200, 300 yards away just down the ridge.
Exactly.
And so I can remember having this conversation with a buddy of mine, like, let's just drop in to one of those spots and see in the morning, and it was like a whole nother world opened up for us. Those deer, we maybe don't give Western critters the same kind of credit for understanding like traffic and pressure, because we always think of them being in more wild places.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm speaking always from a whitetail guy, but they just know where you're not going to see them. They know where the crowd that doesn't want to work that hard is not going to see them.
Exactly.
And so it's a matter of, I don't know if you'd agree with this or not, but to me it's always a matter of like, all right, what's my plan A, B, C, D? And everything revolves around where can I see from first? And you let the glass do the work, huh?
Yep, exactly. And this is just a theory of mine, but just picking people's brain who have been, much more successful than I am mule deer hunting. The one thing I've kind of noticed as a trend is you find deer in the same areas that you hunt. So like we were talking like in North Dakota, you said you find them in the similar areas year in, year out. I think the reason being is because that area has less people or has good habitat, good food, whatever it is, it attracts deer. And so generally speaking, once you kind of figure out those areas, you can go back and there will continually be deer, and trying to figure out what the common denominator there is. Is it lack of pressure? Is it good habitat, good food, whatever? But then once you're able to find it, yes, you hunt that area, but start trying to find other areas from it. And I think really the biggest thing is like these are areas where there's not a lot of traffic, and these deer know to get that they won't be abused and they won't be bothered there.
Yep. So, and it's kind of like when you say that you're spending the time on the glass first and you're looking over these spots, part of that is not only to not disturb the areas and just see what's going on, but you're really building patterns like you're talking about. And this is something, again, the first timer wants to barrel through the cover.
Yeah.
But if you find that group of mule deer bucks in September, just coming out of velvet or whatever, and you see them in a place where they're comfortable and they're on their feet at 10 o'clock in the morning feeding, or at 4 in the afternoon feeding, and they're browsing around and sparring a little bit.
Yep.
You can find those deer again most of the if nobody messes with them.
Exactly.
And you can start to figure out like, oh man, at 11 o'clock this morning, they all dipped down to this cattle pond, drank, then they all went back up. And so it's a matter, it's tough because if you're not used to spotting and stalking, you want to go spot and stalk.
Exactly.
But it's a quantity versus quality thing.
It is.
And so you might watch those deer for 2 or 3 or 4 days before you get the one chance where the wind's right, the conditions are right, you won't skyline yourself, and you can crawl in on them. Most people don't have that patience, do they?
No.
I mean, they want to get in there.
No, but if you look at like the successful mule deer archers, there's a gentleman, Ryan Lampers, out of Bozeman, Montana. He shot one that I believe, I'll get the day wrong. He sat on it for like 6 days waiting for an opportunity for it to actually get in the right spot where the thermals are going to be correct. He can actually stalk in. And he sat and watched that deer do similar tendencies every day, day in, day out, until it got on there. And I think that is one thing, is you see him up feeding, you're like, okay, it's time to go. Let's go. And I'm not saying that can't work, but really your better odds are when you're going to catch them on a pattern, or when they're going to bed and you wait till everything's right, and that's when they're relaxed and being able to come, make sure the thermals are good, approach from above them if they're looking down, because really they're banking on the wind. So if you have the thermals, they're looking away, that's your best chance, is when you can come up from above them. And so the tough part, is patience. You have to be patient, and it may look like a good opportunity, but there's a reason why it's a mature animal. And it can't always, sometimes it's easy, but generally you're going to get, if you get too impatient, you're going to rush the stock, you're going to skyline yourself, the wind won't be right, and you might lose your only chance.
Yep. Well, and I should say this too about that. A lot of people go wanting a mature buck, right? I mean, that's what we all want, right? We want a 30-inch wide, 207-inch typical. If you're not used to mule deer hunting, if you're not used to spotting and stalking, lower your standards. Like people always ask me, like, well, what are you going to be happy with? When I hunt mule deer maybe 5 or 6 days a year. And so I'm like, I want just something with antlers. And not even that sometimes. I mean, like if I can shoot a doe in certain situations, because I know from my experience as primarily an ambush guy, if I'm going to go spot and stalk, I'm going to need 10 stalks for a shot, or 8 stalks, or, and once in a while you just get that one that just works for you, the lone buck that's bedded in the right spot. And that's an amazing experience, but generally not going to happen. And, one thing we should point out when you're talking, watch those bucks, be patient, wait for your opportunity. You get to know who's in that group and who's hanging around. Because and what cattle are in the area and what all the other spoilers are going to be. Because, that's the other thing that people, you get laser focused on that target buck. There's those satellite bucks, or there's the does bedded down here. And so you think, well, I'll just slip through this little draw or whatever. You bust the cows out or whatever, and it's over. One thing I got to tell you. So when you talk about the dude who sat on that buck for however many days, I will never forget my first time at ATA show when I got hired at Peterson's bow hunting. I ended up at a dinner next to Randy Ulmer. And Randy Ulmer's a legend for mule deer hunting, for everything. But he's got the 200-inch bucks figured out. And Randy had one of those years where he had killed like 3 of them, 3 of those velvet bucks that are just unreal.
Yeah.
And I remember asking him about his Colorado buck specifically that year.
Yep.
And he's so humble. He's just like, he just tells me, he goes, I found that buck. And he said, so I just climbed up there and I watched him for 50 days. 50 days in a row.
50 days, yeah.
And then to kill him, he climbed up. He said this buck was so cagey that it would bed down for a while, and then it would just randomly get up, run full speed, dive into a different bed. And so it was just ping pong around this basin. And I don't know if that's a lion thing or what, but he said so he knew his chances of, he knew he was going to get one chance on it, and then that deer was going to move or something. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And so he said, the night before I just went up above him and I slept on the mountainside and I was right with him when the sun came up. And I mean, it was like an incredible story.
Yeah.
And you look at him and you go, well, you see the picture come out, you see the Hoyt catalog or whatever.
Yeah.
You don't hear the dedication. Like it was incredible to listen to how casually he talked about that one specific buck and what he put into it.
Yeah.
And, obviously the lesson here is, you may not have the time or dedication or XYZ factor that Randy Ulmer has, right? Yep. Most of us
Absolutely.
don't. But take it down a notch, go back a notch and go, all right, well, what can I take away from that? He went in for the right opportunity.
Yeah.
Like he watched and watched and watched, and he went in for the right opportunity. And with mule deer, the good thing about that, if we're making it sound too hard, is at least they are visible.
Yeah.
If you do the work to get to where they're at, they're visible, right?
Absolutely. Well, and I think taking a step back, we keep talking mature bucks, and if you bust them out, yes. But I went down to Arizona for the first time this year, and it was a December archery hunt. I knew nothing of the country. Really, it was like a dart on the map. We found public ground. We found areas that we thought we started too high. There was no deer. And so we just kept being nimble and moving with the deer. I think I probably went on 4 or 5 stalks. There was 4 hunters. I mean, we ended up seeing like 170 some deer counting does, but we had lots of opportunities and we were patient and we got close. I mean, I was full drop 46 yards, but I couldn't get around a juniper bush and I just never had a shot. And then I think all of us were full draw at one point. So the thing that's nice is like what we would do is every morning we'd get up to a glassing point and we'd start glassing. Sometimes it'd be ones that we saw the night before and we were waiting for them to come out, or his new area. But then it was finding them, being patient, waiting for him to bed, and then kind of strategizing our stock and going that way, not just rushing in. So it is, it can be daunting, big mule deer, whatever, but there are lots of opportunity. You can get a lot of stocks in. And if you're just, sitting there glassing, and I think that's, and that's the big thing that I've found that's helped me find deer is glassing. And so that's why I keep hammering on it, because we used to not glass as much, and the deer I would see are when we bumped them. But for archery, that doesn't do you a whole lot of good when you're walking through something and all of a sudden a deer's running off. Like, then even if they go in bed, they're still a little weary about what just happened.
Yep.
And so that's why, glassing's the only way to find these deer without you changing anything from their daily routine.
Yep. Well, and that's a good point too about, if you walk around in mule deer territory, you're going to bump them, especially if you're in the breaks or badlands type of stuff or the rim country. And, you have to be aware of that, but you also have to be aware that you shouldn't get paralyzed by one glassing spot.
Yes.
Because sometimes it's just not happening in an area.
Yep.
We talked about North Dakota. We've got a spot we call the Basin there, because you can walk off this oil well road and hike back, a third of a mile maybe, but you can see from that point, you can see so much.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when you get in there, they'll be visible bucks, right?
Yep.
Somewhere, but they might be a mile and a half, 2 miles away, and they just might not be in the game.
Yep.
But it's like, okay, well, I feel like if I sit here and watch them long enough, and sometimes you got to just know, like, this area not happening.
Yep.
No matter, you can glass and you can take your time and you can say this is it, but it might not be. And that's, I mean, I don't know. I hope you agree with this, but I think that's just an experience thing when you're like, all right, I think it's time to call this and move on, right?
No, it is. And it just keeps you engaged in the hunt. And like we were talking about getting away from cars. I'm not saying I don't drive roads, park, go out to a glassing point, hit it for 15 to 30 minutes, and then get back in and cover country. The beauty of eastern Montana, there is a lot of public ground.
Yep.
Sometimes we're hunting an area that's 60 miles. Like we might end up in another county from where we're actually hunting, just covering ground, glassing areas that we know, looking down, just finding like, okay, here's a good state section that has a creek going through. Let's hike out, not skyline ourselves, and go glass it out. Nothing there, keep moving.
And that lesson right there is you make that sound nonchalant. Like, okay, we see this section, but I know there's more to it, right? You're not just hiking out randomly hoping there's a place to look. Like, you've got that planned out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of the times we're pulling from past experiences, but with these state sections, like you can see it's great terrain.
Yep.
It just might happen that there's private around, or it's an ag field leading up into somewhere they'll have cover. And just so happens a road goes through and it's a state section of public ground. I have a mile by a mile. So I'm assuming people are going to look at it and be like, no, that's too small. Like, that's not enough for a hunt. So then it's like, perfect. I speculate that there's not a lot of people hunting it and it has good habitat. I mean, that's what I'm looking for with mule deer hunting. So I'm going to go and try to go in without blowing it out, see if I can find some deer in. There might be some, or maybe they're on private and I'm waiting for them to potentially cross that area.
Well, and that's when you said that to think of it in that scope, right? So you're looking at a section of public land. So you got 640 acres. It could be surrounded by private. And it's sometimes people will look at that like it's a negative, right? Like, oh, there's only 640 acres for the mule deer. But the way public land sets up so often is the best bedding cover or the best some type of cover is on the public, and the best groceries are on the private.
Exactly.
And I mean, this is other than using rivers and moving water a lot. That's like my go-to thing for whitetails when I travel. Is I want to see not only what I can hunt, but what the deer are going to use that I can't hunt.
Yeah.
And sometimes, if you're talking about slipping in on a mule deer or a group of mule deer bucks, sometimes you might find the best morning situation there, right? Where they're, if they're out feeding in the alfalfa a mile away and you can slip into a spot where they're going to come back to water or they're just passing through a coulee or something. And so I think in a grander scheme, what you're saying about that specific example, always try to be doing what other people aren't doing.
Yeah.
Like figure out what, if the rest of the hunting crowd can't see it from glassing or see it from the road, or they're going to look at it and write it off because it's too small, you're going to go look at it and see if they're wrong, right?
Absolutely. You're trying to go where they're not. I mean, really, when you're out hunting, you don't want to see another hunter.
Yep.
Regardless. Like, I would much rather not see any critters by myself than have to find a deer and be worried about a hunter coming here and, like, messing it up. Like, you're trying to get away from hunters, and that is the one thing. Even, like, on public ground, like, you're looking, like, going deep. Maybe you're just going in, you're finding those boundaries on the private, and you're just hunting where they're going to pass by. And so, yeah, absolutely, especially like you're looking from an ambush point of view, if they're feeding on private and they're going to come into the public, like you can set up. And if you know it's a small area, generally speaking, I don't see a lot of hunters. They look past it. They move on to the bigger pieces of public ground.
Well, and it's especially for bow hunters, if there's a section and there's limited access, if you're parked there, most people aren't coming in on you.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of just claim that, right?
Yep.
It's the same thing like if you pulled up there to a section and somebody's truck was there.
I'm going to move on.
Yeah, you're not going in there.
Yeah.
And that lesson's important too, because you can preserve something, and it's not, like if somebody comes in on you, whatever. I mean, that might happen, but a lot of times I don't see, especially with bow hunters, I don't see a lot of people that there's that ethical gray area, right? Like sure, it's your land too, but most people I know wouldn't go in, and most people won't. Some people might, whatever. They might want to come in and see what you're doing, but that's a really good example there, I think, of something that's just like, all right, what's a little bit different than the rest of the crowd's going to do, and it's worth the walk in and a morning or evening.
Exactly.
Right. And so one thing that you said that I want to touch on before I forget. So we think about mule deer. The ideal mule deer situation is watching that buck bed.
Yep.
Like you said, going above him. Mark your little landmarks or whatever. Figure out how to get crawl through the cedars, get close.
Yep.
Get above him. But a lot of times, especially if you're dealing with that smaller property, or you're just you don't have the right situation because of the thermals or something, you're kind of like stalking into an ambush situation.
Yep.
So you're just hoping and this happens with elk too a lot,
Absolutely.
right? But people need to hunt to their strengths a little bit. They need to be open to that. You might not get to watch that buck. That buck might go right through that mile.
Yep.
And so you have to be open to that. But like you said earlier, if you're watching that and those bucks hop that fence from private to public and they browse through there, they might bed there, they might just keep going, but you need to know that, right?
Exactly, yeah. And once you know, then you can go out and get in front of them. And that's where it helps, just like if you're able to pattern deer and see something they're doing consistently, you know they're going to hit point A, B, and then at C you can be waiting for them. And they might bed up, but that's fine because you know roughly where that's at. The biggest thing is like you're not waiting, you're not going to go walk through B as they're heading to C and push them out of there. So I think it's, the one thing is like there is no cut and dry answer on how to do it. A lot of people do it a lot of different ways, but the biggest thing is like find their tendencies and then be patient and find the right opportunity for you, what you're comfortable doing. If that's bedding, setting up, waiting for the perfect conditions, great. Or, the other thing during archery season is it's hot. September, I mean, it can be 90 degrees. They're going to water at some point. Go wait on the water tank, and like wait for them to migrate to the water, or maybe it's a river and you see them, they're crossing at that point or whatever. It's just sitting there and kind of learning from them and then using their tendencies to be successful.